Hello, everyone. Welcome to Finstruction Podcast. Here I, Akriti Bajaj, as your host, will take you through the product building journey from the lens of product managers. Today we have Vijay Sandilya, Director of Product Management at GoKwik. He's donned various hats, right from product marketing manager to a product manager at companies like Axis Bank, Razorpay, and now another budding fintech, GoQuick. He's known for building 0 to 1 products right up from the scratch. Hi, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good, good. So, should we get started?
Yes.
So, for today's episode, we are discussing this revolutionary product that India gave us in terms of payments. That's UPI. So, I think I just want to understand what do you think UPI is, and if you could elaborate more, because I have heard a lot of people saying it's an alias over the top of IMPS, which we already had.
Got it. So I think IMPS, the main difference between IMPS and UPI is the fact that for an IMPS transaction to go through, right, you would essentially need the sender's mobile account number as well as IFSC. Similarly, you also need the receiver's account number and IFSC, right?
Yeah.
So this is where UPI is very different. It does use IFPS underlying architecture, right? That's definitely there. But the main difference is in UPI, you can just send money using uh, uh, receiver's UPI ID, right?
Yeah.
And that's the important difference between the two, right? Very fundamentally, this is very important because this was the way NPCI, right, designed external parties, right, to start getting involved in the fintech architecture of India, so to speak, right? So for
Understood.
example, a Google Pay cannot work with IFBS, right,
Yeah.
because it's a closed architecture, right? Whereas a Google Pay can work with UPI, right? And the main difference again is because of the same thing that while an account number is probably not safe enough to be shared with a third party outside the banking infrastructure,
Yeah.
a UPI ID could, right? So that's the fundamental difference.
Understood, understood. And I think as we are talking about UPI, could you also throw some light on what exactly the front end customer journey and the back end customer journey looks like?
Sure. So I think for the front-end customer journey, right, there are obviously two parts of the entire UPI flow, right? One is creating an account on the UPI system.
Yeah.
So essentially that goes like you register an app, any app, right? Any UPI enabled app, whether it's a Google Pay, Phone Pay, Paytm, etc.
Yeah.
Then you kind of send a message from your mobile number. You choose the mobile number uh, with which your bank is registered with, right? So, for example, let's say Akriti has a ICICI account and the mobile number that you've used, right? So you send a message using that. So
Yeah.
NPCI returns all the various banking accounts that are registered against this particular mobile number, right? And then you, of
Okay.
course, you choose which particular bank you want to add, the banking account that you want to add. So if you choose ICICI, right? And then it returns the ICICI bank account that is registered with your mobile number, right? Post
Okay.
that you choose the account. Let's assume there are two accounts. You probably choose one of them, right? And then you finally set a UPI pin, which is similar to your ATM pin in an
Yeah.
offline card transaction, right? Uh, so then you choose your UPI pin, and that is when you're ready to successfully make a transaction in the front end flow, right? Similarly, that's now when you're paying or making a transaction using UPI, you need the receiver's UPI ID. That's the
It,
only thing you need. You input that, and then you make the transaction using your UPI pin, which is your authenticator. So this is the best part about UPI is if you fundamentally look at the banking infrastructure in India, you always need a two-factor authentication, right?
yeah.
So essentially, your device has become the first factor of authentication here because your mobile number is getting registered with that particular bank account, right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
this particular step has it is kind of removed because as you make your next payment from the same device, right? The first factor is already done, right? So the
Understood.
second factor of authentication becomes your UPI PIN, which is just a 4 digit or a 6 digit number depending on your bank, and then the transaction goes through.
Got it. Got it. And just wanted to understand, since this was like a 0 to 1 product and something which India has built till now, it's not even
Yeah.
there in the developed countries.
So how was that ideation process? Of course, it came from NPCI. I do understand that. But how did the ideation process look like? And even I think in terms of launching the product, how did you go about it? Because as I said, there hasn't been any product. It's not like you were building Uber of India, right? You were
Yeah,
building something which hadn't existed before. So yeah.
yeah, sure. So I think fundamentally, I've spoken to a lot of LPCA folks in the early days in 2016, 17, when I was working in Axis Bank as part of the UPI team, which was launching UPI along with LPCA, right? So I think ideally, as in just as an idea, right? It was a very simple thing, right? Can you just build an identification system which is not your account number, right?
Yeah.
But still is something that everyone remember, right?
Mm.
And the transaction goes through, right? So this was the simple process. The idea is pretty simple, right? And
Yeah.
I think it kind of is not very not intuitive, right? It is intuitive, right? You just rate some. So then people you initially started with the fact that probably your like your UPI ID to begin with, which is linked to your mobile number. Later on, people realized why even a UPI ID, just let's use the mobile number itself. And that's how later on you started seeing UPI IDs, which are just mobile numbers itself, right?
Interesting.
Like your mobile number at that's how the thought process was. But I think the fundamental innovation that happened, like I said earlier, also in the backend flow, right? I think
Yeah.
you also asked about backend flow in an earlier question. So
Yeah.
it's how the banking infrastructure could be opened up to other players, right? That's the innovation that it required. I think I would put innovation in two levels here. One is ensuring that an external party can securely, right, tap into the banking infrastructure of India, right? That was the first innovation. The second innovation is how do you now bring so many different banks on the same platform, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So for example, so like if you go back to the starting days of why a Visa or a Mastercard was required was
Yeah.
because two different banks never used to speak the same language, right?
True.
And again, if you see the fundamental uh, ecosystem in the US or in Russia, example, right? Of Apple Pay or a Google Pay, right? The fundamental difference between both of them is that they are walled architectures, right? A
Yeah.
Google Pay account cannot be used to make an Apple Pay with your phone pay or an Apple Pay account,
Apple Pay
right?
account. Yeah.
Right. So again, the main reason being both of them are different languages, so to speak. They can't communicate with each other. Right. So that is the second innovation that was required. I wouldn't call it really innovation, but it was extremely difficult for a legacy kind of a system in India where the banking providers had to possibly get on the same rails for the first time. Right.
Yeah.
IFPS was the beginning of that, definitely. But IFPS was still easier because it was a kind of an architecture where it allowed banks to probably still operate in their silos and still talk to each other. But
Yeah.
UPI was the first time they really had to get on the same page, right? Because there were so many different parties involved. So if you look at the backend architecture of a UPI system, right, it's essentially a five-party model, right?
Yeah.
There is your PSP, which is your payment service provider.
Right.
Essentially, your banking app, your app, right? Whether it's a phone pay or a Google Pay. Then there is your the issuer bank, which is the banking account that is linked with. Then there is NPCI. Then there is the acquiring bank or the bank of your receiver and the receiver's app, right? With which your PSP he or she is using, right? So
Yeah.
this is the five-party model that is in the background, right? So to get to think of this entire structure is what I think was really innovative. So that where essentially you allow that PSP layers to sit on top and exist, and that is how you see again in the very early days of UPI, right? A lot of small banking apps started creeping up, right? So for example, Axis had its own Axis UPI app, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
everyone else started coming up, right? But then what happened later on is it required a Google to come into the infrastructure to build a Google Pay app to kind of actually smoothen on a lot of issues that were in the underlying process, right? So
Okay.
it was because of Google's technological prowess that it was kind of able to guide the likes of the entire industry of, say, the NBCI, etc. That
Yeah.
this is how let's do it. This is so that was required for us to have that stable infrastructure.
Understood. Understood. And when you were, this product was being built, UPI, uh, did, was it there a part of that strategy that, okay, we should go with these few players in terms of launching like these few PSPs rather than just the banks? What was the idea? And even while launching, did you reach out to few customers to test the product first to understand, whether like it's an MVP testing, trying to build a prototype and actually test it with customers whether they need it. Of course, I think the need was definitely there because the customers didn't want to type those many details, but still, that validation of idea.
Got it. So I think to start out with, NPCI floated out saying that to the banking infrastructure because they needed banks to be the first for adopters, so to speak,
Oh,
because that is where it all started with. So they kind of asked banks to take it, and whoever wanted to adopt digital technology at that point of time, I think it was ICICI and Access to start off with, right? They said, okay, let's do this with NPCI, right? Now, of course,
understood.
the requirement was also to ensure that they had a front end app, right? There's no point if I just integrate
Exactly.
uh, the back end of NPCI, right? So they needed a
Yeah.
front end app. So ICICI decided to integrate this entire functionality inside their ICICI mobile app, right? Which is still there,
Okay.
which is their flagship banking app, right?
Yeah.
If they accessed out of doing it a different way, where they had a earlier uh, product called FinPay, right? Which
Yeah.
didn't really fly off, right? So they tried to change that itself into an UPI app. So they had a standalone app, right? Access had a standalone app. So that was the difference. So that is how the initial front end of how they interface with the customer, right?
Yeah.
That's what started to build. And simultaneously, NPC was also building this along with JustPay, which is the Beam app that you see today.
Yeah.
So these were the first three apps, so to speak. And then, of course, as people understood, as companies understood, that is when the outside players such as a PhonePe or a
Oh, oh,
Google Pay started coming in, right? So that is how the so-called progression happened. And I think in terms of testing, right, a lot of user testing definitely went through, right? Even within the bank, it was initially launched to a few users in the bank, where probably a lakh, because again, banks have the luxury of so many employees, right?
true,
So
true.
they become
Yeah.
the first beta users.
Yeah.
So a lot of user testing definitely went through it. And I think in terms of teaching people what exactly the registration of a UPI app is, right, was
Yeah.
actually very, very difficult. As in, so imagine, right? Imagine pre 2016, right? Nobody even understood why you had to choose a particular SIM, right? Or what does the mobile number have to do with your bank account and what
Bank account.
exactly is
Exactly.
UPI?
Like most of the people would not even have registered their phone number,
Exactly.
especially in terms of kids. I think they have given away their parents' phone number for bank account registration.
Yeah.
Definitely. I get.
Even adults, right? A lot of them had a different mobile number, or probably they just didn't register the SMS banking. It was called then, right?
Yeah.
All of that
I
was
know.
not registered then, right?
Yes.
So I think that was very important for all these various front-end apps, right? Like your UPI, Access UPI, Weave, etc., to explain to the user why essentially you're doing this and what does it mean, right? So,
Mm.
for example, what is a UPI pin? Matlab, when should you use it? Do you need to
True.
remember it? When do you actually use it, right? So that was a very critical journey that we all took. So, for example, I still remember in the early days of making Access Pay UPI app, right? We used to sit
Yeah.
with users where we asked them to say, or just create a UPI pin for your first transaction. They didn't really get it, right? Why should I make it? So then we
Yeah.
started using different kind of messaging. Let's say, can we say, this is similar to your ATM pin. It's just that for online transactions, you have to use this pin, right? Or probably, can I say that, this is required for your safety when somebody had to do mobile registration, right? There was a pop-up which used to come saying this SMS will go, right? So now users were confused. Why is this happening? Why is an SMS going from my
Yeah.
again, that was not, if you remember 2016, before the OTP based login was not a thing, right?
True. True.
Probably people
Now
have
it's
seen Google.
pretty hygiene.
Okay. Yeah, now it's pretty hygiene, right? So those days it was not. So then we had to explain that this is required for safety. This is the first factor of authentication. Again, these are words that people don't understand, right? So then we started playing around and said, for security reasons, we are attaching your mobile number to your account so that nobody else can pay from any other mobile. And then we started iterating on this messaging, right? That is when
Got
people
it.
started understanding. So it took a proper MVP process. And I think in terms of success, right? If you look at the core, uh, the core reason why this entire system should exist, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people were still paying before, right?
True.
They were had in EFT, they had IMPS, right? So I wouldn't say this was something that people really needed, right? In that sense, it was not a need, but it was something that if you once understand the benefit of it, you all of a sudden feel, oh, I really need this, right? So, for example, think of Uber or Ola, right? Before that,
Yeah.
we still traveled. I mean, all of us did travel. It's not like
Yeah.
it was travel. It's just that now that we are used to the convenience of Uber, we can't imagine a world without it, right? So
Understood.
UPI was one such product. So I think if you ask me how do you define PMF for such a product,
Yeah.
it is the first time a user actually understands the value of pay, right? When a couple of times when they make a payment and they realize, oh, it's so simple. You don't have to make a beneficiary registration, which was a thing, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
don't need that. You don't need anything. You just like I ask a mobile number and the transaction goes through, right? So when they realize that aha moment, right? When okay, it's as simple as that,
Yeah.
and when there's a sizable amount of people doing this, right? Because the need should exist, right? I mean, the number of transactions you make also they should exist, right? We were actually making a calculation that I think a normal person would not do more than 5 transactions, digital transactions, right? In
Oh.
those days was still very cash was still privileged, but even then it was given privilege. So
And yeah, I
probably
think
there
card
were five
was also
transactions.
there. So obviously that was another
Exactly.
competition. Yeah.
Card was definitely a competition, right? And that is when I think that's why even those 5 transactions for someone to realize the importance, it needed scale, right?
Okay.
So
So five
that is how I
transactions a
totally agree.
month, you were saying.
Yes, five
And
transactions
this is
a month. We
something
probably decided.
you use
Yeah.
as a PMF metric that if this is
I think internally for access, we use 3 transactions. But I'm saying at least on a network level, people were doing around 5 transactions. So we were like, okay, let's say if someone made 3 transactions, is when they will truly realize, okay, this is how easy it is to pay. And now I want to use a UPI app, right? So then I would say that this is PMF or the UPI as a product rather than probably access pay or something.
understood, understood. And I think that's a great perspective. Generally, people link product market fit to the fact that, okay, customer has come on the product, they've used it once, and yeah, we have achieved product market fit. But actually, taking them to the point that they have actually realized the value, and that will come after, 2, 3 transactions. That is the true
Yes.
essential product market fit. I think that's really interesting from, looking at that very specific metric. I think that's super insightful. So in terms of, you mentioned that customers, obviously, it was difficult to explain to them what this product is because obviously it does not exist anywhere, and how could you draw the comparisons? So what were the acquisition tactics actually used to scale this product or even introduce, and how I think you've already touched upon that trust factor, but if you could elaborate a little more, because I'm also thinking from the perspective that, oh, there's this app which is asking me to link my bank account. Is it trustworthy enough? I am not supposed to do that because we are always shown those ads. You should not share your OTP with anyone. You should not share your bank details with anyone. So there's a new product in the market which is asking me to tell these details. So it sounds a little, I think
Yeah.
now it does not, but at that time it would have.
Yes, yes. So I think the acquisition strategy was very use case driven. I mean, incentives and use case. I mean, incentives is very prevalent in India.
Yeah. Yeah.
I, as a product manager, would never, like it as such, but it's a fact of reality that in India, incentives do work. But more importantly, I think it was the use case, right? So, for example, when somebody is paying rent or when somebody is making a friendly payment, right? So that was the kind of acquisition strategy that we use. That can we explain to the user that this is a faster way of paying your friend, right? Is this a faster way of paying your owner, or is this a faster way of sending money to your folks back home, right?
Yeah.
So those were the kind of use cases that we started focusing on, and all our ads, all our communication was dependent solely on these use cases to explain that okay, these are the use cases, right? So, for example, again, if you see the UPI journey, there are two very different pods, so to speak, P2P and P2M transactions, right?
Yeah.
So initially, sending it to your own friends, your as in people around you. So we figured out okay, these are the top 5 use cases that why probably one person would pay to another, right?
Yeah.
And I keep telling people that there's an easier way. So that was the main acquisition strategy, so to speak. And then P2M transaction, which is your pay, person to merchant transaction, right?
Yeah.
So that is where it had to come in, because that is where true scale and network effect starts to come in, when you can pay everywhere. Because typically what happens is, if you see a P2P transaction is more personal, right? I'm paying to, right? But where in a P2M transaction, you're probably paying a chai wala, or you're probably paying online, and that's the first and the last transaction probably be making with that particular entity, right?
True.
So that trust factor really had to come in to bridge that gap, and that is where we started using a lot of incentives for particular merchants. So, for example, I still remember in the early days, PVR was a big client of Access, and we really pushed it through, saying that when you're making your movie booking, right, pay using UPI and get X% off. Again, it was very use case driven. But then that was the kind of communication that we used to figure out how to acquire customers from the first move, right? Really, really just use cases, and exactly when someone is going through that process, tell them that there's a better way of paying, right? And now coming to the trust factor, I still remember this very, very interesting small UI change which we made, right? Initially, access was very, very small in the entire app layout, right? We were focusing on why you should pay, how you should be, why is it secure, etc., right? But we all of a sudden realized that trust is something that is gained over years and not probably in just one screen, right? So all of a sudden we started making the access logo bigger, right? Similarly, if you see Beam, right, they started making the Indian flag or the Indian colors bigger,
Yeah.
right? Because that is where you figure out, okay, so if you see something which is in Indian colors, you automatically attach it to the India, and then you all of a sudden trust is established. Similarly, Axis Bank has enough trust in the market, right? So it's trustworthy enough. So those were the things that we started using as trust markers, and that kind of, and we also had a clear notification saying that this is a central bank, etc., etc. So that is how we started bridging that safety and say a trust factor. And that's the reason, if you see, even in the initial days, phone pay really struggled, because phone pay, Google people do trust, right? But phone pay really struggled.
True. True.
But again, they also use similar markers like this, where you're trying to identify trust, etc. And that is how it really scaled up.
Got it. Got it. I think this is, very interesting. I had never thought about it from that lens that, these small UI changes of just increasing the logo size. Because yes, I do agree, if we are associating it with the trustworthy bank, and I think this is where ICICI must have not faced that issue, because they had integrated within their app itself,
Exactly.
mobile banking app.
Exactly.
So now the
Yeah.
customers know, oh, I am using this app to transfer funds anyway. Now they've just given me a new way to transfer it, and it's still in my mobile banking app, so I can trust
Yeah.
it. But a new app standalone, I think this is where these fixes could work. This is super interesting. And did you also go about thinking from the perspective that how can we educate customers on the app itself? Should we have like some education pieces on what this UPI is? How does it work? Like from that
Also,
perspective.
like you were saying, we divided it into two buckets, right? Registration and making the transfer, and all of them had these small self-help, indicators to kind of explain it to the user. We were actually even thinking of, calling up customers who were stuck on some screen, right? And speaking to them, but didn't really take off. But yeah, we definitely used a lot of in-app notifications, in-app, we even use emailers, right? Very effectively to kind of communicate that if you probably are stuck here, this is probably a reason. So as acquisition and engagement strategy, right? We used to divide users into cohorts:
Okay.
registered but not activated user, one time activated user, one time, two times, three transactions in month. We used to put them in various buckets and send them relevant information to kind of help them bridge that and go into the next step, right? So a lot of such communication was used both within the app, in email, on SMSs, everywhere.
Got it, got it. I think that's interesting. And I think I also this thing came to my mind that how, Google Pay, I am an avid Google Pay user. So they have this small comment that you are supposed to write when you are, making the
Yeah,
payment. So I think that also gives much more view to the payment apps that why this payment is being made. And if it's something
yeah,
like called a rent, can I nudge the users to make this payment
yeah,
every month? or is
Yeah.
it for a friend? So I think that is where that personalization factor also comes in
Yes, yes,
play.
yes. So that was one. So we actually in the initial days, right? I remember we used to call up customers to understand why they made a transaction, right? A lot of people obviously used to say, "I wanted to get cash back, so I made the transaction."
Yeah.
A lot of
Oh my God.
use cases there.
Yeah. I know a lot of people who cashed in this because I think it was like, you refer one friend and you are getting 50 rupees. And I think
51
that,
to be precise.
yeah, and I think
Uh,
at that time there was no limit of, how much,
yeah,
there was no cap on the cash book. So I think people were going around their offices and telling them, please, I am
yeah.
referring you and please, just come log in the app or like sign up or whatever. And I need this money. I am making like 500 bucks simply in 10 minutes.
Oh, so one Axis Bank employee, I think one lakh rupees in a scratch card in
Okay.
the Google Pay days, and that went viral. So all Axis Bank employees after that started going bonkers on Google Pay.
Oh my God. No, I think that was a great referral strategy, but of course, with a lot of cash burning, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And so, for example, if you look at the UPI ecosystem even today, right? Nobody really knows how to make money out of UPI, right? It's something on top of it that is needed to kind of make sense of the entire strategy. So, for example, I think one thing that is very interesting to note is ICICI wanted we introduced it within the app, right? But that Axis wanted to use it outside the app because they wanted to see if this can become a new account acquisition strategy for the entire bank, right? So,
understood.
for example, Akriti does not have a Axis Bank account, but
Mhm.
probably you have some other account which you link on the Axis Bank, and then you start building trust with the user, and then ask them to finally open Axis account. So they were looking at it as a new acquisition strategy, right?
Got
So
it.
because they felt that let's assume the get opening a new account through a retail chain, right? Is
Yeah,
probably around 1,500 rupees. Can we figure out if this route will probably be lesser than that, right? So
understood.
that was the thought process, and also these new age folks, right, like you and me, who are probably more
Savvy.
digital savvy customers, can we use these channels to tap them in because probably they are not folks who will go to a retail outlet, right?
Understood.
Similarly, if you look at Google Pay, right, even still not, till now, they're still figuring out how to make Google Pay itself, right, as just Google Pay profitable, right? So they are figuring out how to give loans, how to
Loans,
give
actually.
probably
Yeah, I saw that.
loans or small ticket size loans, right? And probably how to make various P2M payments and get then some commission from the merchant itself, right? But that's the main problem that initially also I feel if the reason a lot of government push was required for
Mm.
UPI becoming so big was the fact that there was no way you could earn money, even for a razor pay. Uh, I was previously working with Razorpay, right? And one of the major problems that Razorpay or any PG faces is that the MDR on UPI is zero, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So you really are not making money, but you still have to make probably a lot of innovations there. So then, how do you what is the business model there?
yeah, yeah.
So, but still, I don't think we have an answer there, other than building probably other kind of services on top of the UPI pivot. But yeah,
No, I think, yeah, like that's a great way to end this conversation because I feel like, in payments, everyone is still trying to figure out how to make money. And I feel the ultimate evolution comes, people start lending through that
yeah,
same app. That's what we are seeing on, Paytm doing it and Google Pay is doing it.
everywhere.
Yeah, like they will either make it a super app or give some one or two more products on the app to make money out of that customers who are on the app because the acquisition fee is zero. They are already hooked to your product
Yeah.
and the stickiness is great. So I think, yeah, definitely this is something which needs to be solved in
Yeah.
India and we'll wait for it and maybe have another discussion once it's solved.
I think one last thing I wanted to kind of say is if you look at the entire advertising strategy for
Yeah.
any e-commerce company today, right? They only have two channels. It's Facebook and it's Google, right?
Yeah,
So I mean, I think there is a huge movement that is happening where all these various apps which have users, right? Can they become a third or a fourth acquisition channel for these e-commerce companies? Is I think the next boom that's
definitely.
going to happen.
Definitely. And I think like it comes from the fact that how, Google Pay also, they were distributing money earlier, but now they are giving
Yeah.
out coupons. So those
Yeah.
coupons are
Yeah.
obviously cheaper than the money they are giving, but there is also an advertising strategy that is hidden there. And a lot of D2C brands can come and launch there on those apps that, okay,
Yes.
I can start giving out my coupons, get customers through Google Pay, and then, maybe go
Yeah.
to Google SEO and Facebook ads later. No,
And
definitely. I
I
think,
keep speaking to a lot of B2C founders, right? So
yep.
average acquisition cost on Facebook is around 300 to 350 rupees. So
Okay.
anything that is lesser than any of these places, they will love it. And yeah, and very recently, I took a slice card because I was seeing an offer on Swiggy, right? Again,
Yeah, yeah, they have
very,
crazy offers. I think that happens whenever a new card is launched in the
yeah,
market. All other offers are disappeared, and we can only see those new card offers. And then I'm like, should I get this card because I don't have the offer for my old cards now. So
so yeah, yeah, yeah,
that cycle will keep doing. I think by this rate, I would have to have like 8 or 10 credit cards. So I just,
oh, I already have six.
oh my God,
Yeah,
I can't do that. I think with UPI, it actually turned me into a user, especially with COVID. I stopped using my credit card. Okay, if it's
yeah,
just,
yeah,
reward points, that's also something I've seen as a devaluation by the banks. So what's the point of using a credit card? Like,
yeah.
at least to me, it is. I am totally a pro UPI user. And I do not even carry cash a lot of times. I think in India, we've reached that stage where you can travel 1,000 miles and still not have 1 rupee in your pocket.
I swear, the
And you
likes of
can,
Bharat Pay.
yeah, yeah. So I think that level of revolution has been there because of just UPI. So it's
Yep,
actually insane.
definitely. Yeah,
Great,
yeah.
great. I think as we end this, I just wanted to ask, like, if you could give one advice for the product builders.
I think in this entire UPI journey, what was really fascinating, I think we've discussed that, is uh, how do you really figure out how a GTM strategy, right?
Yeah.
And then actually coming up with a PMF metric, right? So as product managers, especially in new age startups, right? A lot of people are looking towards the product folks to
Yeah.
really tell everyone if a customer is hooked on to your product or not, right?
Yeah.
So if you as a product manager probably err in deciding what is the definition of a PMF or what is the definition of a high user as they call it,
Yeah.
right? Or a hook user, uh, then a lot of things can go wrong from there. So it is very, very important as a product manager to nail that down, whether it is 3 transactions as we discussed in this,
Yeah.
or probably booking, say, 5 rides on a Uber or anything like that, right? So depending that becomes very, very critical.
Understood. Understood. I think, yeah, I think this is where, once you have that confidence that you've reached that product market fit, can at least take a sigh of relief that, yes, my product is needed and it will be required by the customers. I think this is great. Thank you so much, Vijay. This was super insightful.
Thanks, Akriti, for having me.